Hi there, I'm Katy Rose and welcome to the Rooted Reinvention, a podcast exploring the real-world journey of reinventing who we are without burning out or burning our whole life down. I teach people how to make lasting change by melding my Masters of Neuroscience and my Cognitive Therapy qualification with common self-help tools, spiritual concepts, and my personal experience. Because being yourself doesn't need to feel so damn hard. To get more information on podcast episodes, please visit rootedreinvention.com/podcast. Happy Tuesday, or whatever day you're listening to this on. One of the things that I think is getting more and more common is an understanding of and recognition of burnout. Whether this is through a day job, whether this is through pushing yourself so much that your body physically gets ill and unwell, or whether it is that something that you've loved for years suddenly feels like a chore and you kind of don't really want to be doing it anymore. Burnout can look different for everyone, and it can show up in different ways. So there is no kind of, this will always lead to burnout for every person. But one of the things that I've noticed is that particularly when we're going through a transition, burnout seems to be an underlying theme when we're going through big change like transitions. So whether that's changing jobs, moving house, getting a new pet, starting a new relationship, moving forward or backwards even in any stage of life tends to lead to us doing either new things, trying to do new things on top of the old things, trying to change the things we're doing. Again, as it's still the beginning of the year, I do also think about this in regard to New Year's resolutions and goals. And one of the things I wanted to share is the concept of a boom and bust cycle. So this is something that we talk about in cognitive therapy around pacing yourself, but I feel like the concept can be applied to pretty much any activity that anyone does. And the idea of it is that there are some things that we tend to just push ourselves to do. And it might be because you're very excited about it, it's a brand new project, you're feeling really creative and like you just want to push ahead and get it all done now. It might be a panic, sort of, I haven't got time to take my time with this, I have to get this all done. I tend to think about if your parents are coming over and you haven't cleaned the house in a week, kind of really trying to do an entire deep clean of the entire house in just a couple of hours, as probably a modern example of this, although perhaps not that modern considering a lot of us are in lockdown. But kind of going all out to the point where we then are unable to keep up that pace. And that would be where we would have our bust, as it were. So you've done your boom, where you end up feeling like where things just explode with activity, with excitement, with ideas, with steps here and there, with actions. And then you end up with bust, where you are either laying in bed sleeping for 18 hours because your body physically couldn't handle all of the effort that you put in, or perhaps your brain just is fried and isn't really working and you're not really forming coherent sentences because you've spent 16 hours looking at one particular topic and trying to get a website to work and through all the errors, and you're kind of in it and it's just kind of been too much for you at that time. Equally, when you've been working in a particularly difficult job for a couple of years, you kind of reach that point where you no longer give it your all because you just can't. And quite often that can lead to a sense of, so there's no point in trying. And we kind of move into that kind of from 100 to 0 space. And the idea of considering your boom and bust cycle is to become aware when you are approaching that sort of top level. So in terms of pacing for health conditions, we would say if you believe that you can normally walk a mile, and then on the mile, when you walk the mile back, like the second mile, is when you start to feel exhausted, and then you spend the next 3 days and you're like barely able to get up the stairs, then that's a boom and bust cycle. And maybe then what you need to do is walk half a mile and then half a mile home, because then you're not going to hit that point where you are completely incapacitated the next few days. And then when you know where your kind of safe limit is, you can then extend it. So you extend it from half a mile to 3/4 of a mile, and then 3/4 of a mile home. That takes you to 1.5 miles overall, which is where perhaps you were starting to get sort of tired, but you're not completely overdoing it on yourself. And again, thinking about this cycle and kind of pacing yourself and where your safe levels of things are is really important when we're coming up with new ideas, when we're having new goals, when new things come up for us. So for me, one of my kind of intentions for the year was to start exercising more, because that's something that I used to do 3 times a week without a problem, and in the last year or so have fallen off the wagon. But I was also feeling that I do so many things for my self-care that I didn't want to add another one in. So what I did is I basically said, well, if I'm going to do my exercise, then I'm going to do yoga, because that can go in my current meditation slot, because I can meditate while I do yoga. That's a very natural kind of part of the process, and I can tick both boxes off with one 10-minute a day stint. And I did that because I have tried to, over the past couple of years, add in exercise and up my meditation to daily and add in journaling. And it's just too much for me to do long term. Like, it's too much for my brain to remember to do. The moment that something happens or goes wrong or I get ill, it's the first thing that drops, and then I feel like I failed, and I feel like I've fallen off the wagon, and I've broken my chain of keeping it going. And actually being able to just set, do you know what, for the next 21 days I'm going to do yoga instead of meditation, because that will get me moving my body and still having some meditative practice, and then I'm going to see where I'm at. And actually I've now decided that I'm going to stretch it to the 30 days and see where I go at the end of the 30 days. I've kind of stretched it out a little bit from the original 21 because I'm finding it working for me. I feel like I'm actually meditating more time in the day than I was when I was sitting down for a solid 5-minute practice, because I spent half of that wondering what I was going to have for dinner, or feeling really frustrated with that ache in my leg and trying to ignore it, or whatever other distractions were around. So when we're going through transitions, or even when just life is happening, because I'm also thinking about, actually the whole of the last year has been a bit of a transition for most of us in some way or other, be that moving to working from home, be that to being furloughed and not having a job, be that to your job role changing, be that to the fact that actually your children are home all the time and need your attention all the time, and actually you need to not burn out in terms of getting your me time as well, and getting your time to refill your well so that you can continue to be there for your friends and family. So thinking about burnout and kind of where your limits are, and kind of trying to almost experiment again with that idea of, well, what would it be like if I only walked half a mile there and half a mile back? Like, how different would my life be, apart from I wouldn't be unable to walk around my house for the next 2 days because I'd overdone it? And thinking about any of the sort of goals that you have in terms of cleaning the house, decluttering, sorting out the garden, whatever it may be, just considering, well, actually, how do I do this without completely throwing myself in at the deep end and then knackering myself at the end? I'm currently editing a novel that I started in 2013, and on the first couple of days I really had this like drive and motivation, and I threw myself into it and was like, yeah. And I've got into the weeds now, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore, and I'm tired, and I'm sick of the story, and I'm only making it worse, and all the normal processes that come from editing a third draft novel, and kind of looking at beta reader feedback and trying to like compile it all together. And I'm in the weeds and I don't want to do it. But again, it's about knowing my boom and bust cycle, knowing where I'm at. So I took a week off and then I came back to it yesterday and had another little look at it. And yeah, it wasn't the most fun thing I've ever done because, as I say, this is not necessarily my favourite part of the process. But I know that the part after this is going to be worth getting to. And if I can do that in a safe, sane, mildly pleasant, if not neutral way, then I'm going to do that. And it's all just through being aware of what parts of my life burn me out, where is my kind of safe limit, at what point do I tend to boom and then sort of bust, and just being kind to yourself around what's going on in your life at the moment and the expectations that we have for ourselves. At some point I will record my episode about expectations we hold for ourselves, but I have a feeling it might be a 1 hour long special, so we'll get there eventually. I would love to know if you have any thoughts around burnout, around pacing yourself, around transitions, if there are any difficulties that you particularly notice, because this is something that I feel like I've helped quite a lot of people with individually, and I'd like to perhaps expand. So if there's anybody who feels like, oh my goodness, I think I could do with some help on this, or actually you didn't address this aspect, I'm really wondering what you think, please do give me an email at katyrose@rootedreinvention.com. And I will either make it into a podcast episode or I will email you back with some responses, because this is definitely something that I feel called to talk about a little bit more. As always, everything I've mentioned will be in the show notes, which you can find at rootedreinvention.com/podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you are all safe and well and getting through this year that is 2021. And I will speak to you again next week. Bye. Thanks for listening, and as always, you can find out more at rootedreinvention.com. Take care, remember you are more capable than you often realise, and I'll see you next time. Bye.